We're really keen to continue in this path, and delighted that Andy Sewell could be with us for an extended stay over the next month. I should perhaps explain how I came to Andy's work. Something I do know a little about is the kind of mystical photography of London. And you will know, if you are a Londoner, there's an immense significance in whether you come from North London or South London. And if you come from North London, which I do, then there is this huge oasis of green in the middle of North London called Hampstead Heath. That it has been impossible for my family over several generations to extricate ourselves from. And the heath is this vast expanse of open parkland. On the east side, it has the single-sex swimming ponds, the men's pond, whose usual contingents are Orthodox Jews, gay men, and Russians from the trade delegation. The women's pond above it, the mixed bathing pond where the water is not so good on the west side, a circus once a year, and in between this extraordinary zone that is sort of countryside, sort of city, neither one thing nor the other thing. And the person who I think has best captured this incredibly important piece of London is Andy Sewell, who published, I guess, your first book of photos. Was it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Called The Heath. There it is, and you can see that's the map of the Heath, and there's the Heath in the middle. In 2012, and when I saw this book, I just thought this was completely brilliant. In a way, in a very gentle, thoughtful way, it somehow spoke to my experience of this place and to the experience, I think, of many other people, to judge from the reviews it got. It got enormous attention. It was the International Photo Book Award winner for that year, and it got fantastic reviews. And the reviews sort of converged on a set of adjectives, I would say, really. Thoughtful, meditative. One thing they mostly didn't say, but to strike me, is that his photos are incredibly beautiful. And after this talk and discussion, I hope you'll join us downstairs for drinks, where we've been fortunate to hang some of these photos. He subsequently published a second book that moved in very interesting ways away from this theme, called Something Like a Nest, that appeared in 2014, that emerged at a moment where I think, and perhaps we'll talk more about this afterwards, there was beginning to be a really interesting set of critical reflections about the relationship between pastoral and modernity in English and European history. And this book, boom, went right to the heart of that, for me anyway. It is about life in the countryside, and again, in this very undogmatic, quiet way, throwing up a lot of very interesting questions about the relationship between the images that the countryside has generated and the lives that people live in it. And he's now embarking on a third project, which perhaps he will talk to us a little about today. So we're very, very pleased, Andy, that you were able to come and join us. Just so that you know, this is the beginning of a residency for a period of about a month in which the photos will be up. We'll have the talk this evening, and then on Friday there will be a series of informal conversations, including conversation with faculty and students, to which people are warmly invited to come here again. Tonight what will happen is that Andy will speak for about 45 minutes, and then my colleague Susan Peterson from the History Department, who is a historian of modern Britain, but of many other things as well. But so far as I know, not a historian of photography, so this will be interesting. Is going to say a few words to kick off discussion. We'll have a discussion, and then at the end of that we will adjourn downstairs. So, Andy, thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Mark. It's great to be here. So, yes, as Mark was saying, I'm going to this evening show two bodies of work: the Heath and Something Like a Nest. And when this book came out, there was a review of it which described the photographs as portraits of the act of observation. And I think, for me, that sort of hit something that I suppose is probably a fairly good description of what I understand I'm doing. And I think photographs of these kind of strange, slippery things. They're kind of these mute moments of kind of space and time, abstracted from their context. So a moment taken out of the flow of time, everything that's around it kind of removed, and they can show us this kind of view of this scene with complete clarity, but the meaning remains elusive. I think this makes them really good at exploring something that I've always kind of been drawn to, and that's what happens when we look closely at what's in front of us. And also, I suppose, a tension that I think we're always grappling with between fact and meaning. And as I say, for as long as I can remember, I've always enjoyed allowing myself to become absorbed in what's in front of me. And most of the time, we're not really aware of what's around us in any detail, for good reasons. Would be kind of overwhelmed otherwise. Our brain is kind of filling in, constructing the world around us according to a kind of perceptual model that our experience creates. And so consciously taking in the particulars of a place, of allowing our gaze to settle and kind of becoming more fully aware of this stuff in this moment is an experience that I often find is powerful, sort of steadying, exhilarating, lucid, mysterious. And I find there's certain photographs that manage to kind of convey something of that experience. And I suppose those are the pictures that I'm most kind of captivated by. I suppose that they manage to somehow contain this kind of contradictory mixture of sensations. And so it's this act of looking closely and trying to hold on to and kind of convey something of that experience that makes me want to go out and take photographs. But then a large part of making a kind of finished body of work is in the studio. It's about discovering kind of what these pictures are part of, finding connections between them, relationships. I was reading recently about the painter Frank Auerbach, and he said that for him the problem of painting is to see a unity within a multiplicity of evidence, to find some sort of whole for this overwhelming and unmanageable heap of sensations and impressions. And although the kind of specifics of medium are quite different, I think it's the same basic problem that I'm interested in exploring with photography. I suppose that's how to make something with enough shape for the viewer to find meaning in it, which is coherent, but also kind of acknowledges the messiness, the multiple meanings, contradictions of the world as we find it. I suppose to put it another way, it's how to make something that feels meaningful, but that we can also believe to be true. And I think this is something that photography can do well. Present things as we find them, the kind of messy, the messy contingency of stuff in front of us. It's also great at doing exactly the opposite, of use. It's often used to carefully construct a world that is the one we want to see or expect to see. And obviously advertising is doing this all the time, and as are we when we kind of post the shiny pictures of ourselves to Facebook or Twitter. And I guess in this picture here, I suppose I guess in the pictures, the views that I'm drawn to, I'm looking for instances where the familiar images in my head are disrupted in some way. So here we see a view from a kitchen window out onto a a rural landscape beyond. And I suppose the image of a country kitchen is one we're familiar with, and I suppose we might think of simple food from the surrounding fields being prepared on time-worn tables, a kind of daily connection to the earth and the seasons. And what we see here is obviously quite a distance from that advertisers or kind of interiors book idyll. There's the grapes, which are obviously travelled thousands of miles probably from where they grew, and wood is replaced by plastic. But there's also something for me in this picture which pulls back towards a kind of pastoral notion of connection to fundamental things and kind of rhythms. And I suppose I imagine the person who lives here standing in front of the sink, washing up each day, seeing the seasons slowly change, and a kind of joy of seeing the birds feed on food bought from the supermarkets. And it just in the kind of the icy blue of the plastic bowl, something that for me tonally kind of links with the winter, the cold winter scene outside, and sort of bridges in some strange way the kind of gap between the interior and exterior. And again, there's the kind of muted colours we might expect to see, disrupted by the sort of soap bottle backlit, kind of jewel-like and lurid, sort of beautiful and jarring. And I think it's these sort of tensions that I hope to kind of weave into the work, sort of pushing with and against the kind of established symbolism and iconic imagery. So I'll come back to this is the first picture from Something Like a Nest, and I'll come back to that project in a little bit. But now's probably a good time to turn to The Heath, the first book. And I think Mark gave a good description of this place, but ever since I've lived in London, it's somewhere but I suppose I've always spent a lot of time, and I guess in a way it can feel like an escape from the city. But you can find a scene like this, kind of embedded deep within London, seems unlikely, and it is this place of kind of ancient trees, of tall grass, and of kind of thickets which are dense enough to get lost in, if only briefly. But it's no pathless wood. It's as carefully managed as any other part of London, as any of the other parks in London. But the difference with the Heath is that it's managed to feel wild. And I suppose it's something of this paradox of managed wildness that was part of what kind of intrigued me about the place, and made me want to start exploring it, taking photographs. And it's a great place to kind of explore the intertwined relationship between what we think of as natural and what we think of as human. And I suppose the essential indivisibility of those categories, the way that one can bleed into the other or flip completely, kind of depending on how we define how we perceive them. But it's also, and so it's an exploration of these opposing ideas, perhaps. But it's also an attempt, I suppose, just to explore the kind of pull this place has on me. The thing that the E.O. Wilson called the human condition of biophilia, that sense of being drawn somewhere that feels natural without really knowing why. And this picture is actually an exception in the work. And in the book it's kind of snuck in right at the beginning against the end papers. And it's the only picture that doesn't, in which we can't see any sign of kind of human intervention. I suppose for me it represents that kind of romantic fantasy, Byron's Pathless Wood. And I suppose romanticism is something that, when thinking about these things, it's kind of obvious obvious point of reference. And the Heath actually has a kind of history of that's closely linked with Romanticism. The statute that preserves it that states it should be preserved in a state of wildness was came about in the kind of mid-19th century at the height of the Romantic movement, when people felt that this place needed saving because Londoners needed, for their health, for their kind of mental and physical health, contact with the wild. And Wordsworth and Coleridge and Keats all made work up there. Wordsworth didn't. Constable did. Wordsworth's the next book. So yeah, and it's a kind of baggy term, Romanticism, I suppose. It's often used as a pejorative, but I think obviously there's plenty that was important to Romantics, but still kind of charges how we think of the world today and how we perceive the world today. And I suppose with part of my intention with the Heath was to try and make a work which speaks to these things that's rooted in today. So the main sequence begins here with this very clearly defined path, but there are also these kind of, and it's kind of hard on the projector. You lose a lot of the detail, but these kind of dark woods at either side of the frame, kind of scratchy, and to me kind of feel like that kind of romantic forest, kind of wild and foreboding. And in the next picture, I suppose this man at the centre of the frame, to me, represents the viewer, or perhaps me, kind of wandering with his binoculars, kind of engaged in this act of looking. And he feels sort of both kind of comfortable, but also out of place, slightly sheepish, perhaps like a sort of a more hesitant, kind of less heroic figure from a Caspar David Friedrichs painting. And here the man at the centre of the frame is replaced by his palm leaf. Obviously a palm is a natural thing, but it doesn't naturally grow in London. So what's it doing here? I took the picture around Easter, so I guess it's got something to do with Palm Sunday, but the photograph doesn't tell us that. And for me, there's something going on in this picture. Or there's a number of things going on in this picture. I suppose there's a kind of knotty nature-culture relationship. There's a symbolism of the palm itself, kind of eternal life, peace, and the fact that it here is kind of decaying back into the ground, again, many, many miles from where it grew. So perhaps it's kind of symbolizing global supply chains as well. And what does it mean, kind of dried up, now that this kind of symbol of eternal life is kind of dried up and decaying? And so these reflections are just, I suppose, my attempt to share something of my response to these pictures as I look at them today, and some of the thoughts lines of thought that kind of went into making the work. Hopefully you'll have a range of responses, some of which perhaps are common with mine, and others which are kind of shaped by your own experience. And photographs are these kind of ambiguous things that they kind of encourage us to interpolate meanings out of them. And when one picture follows on from another, we want to find connections. And I think that's why, although I enjoy exhibiting work as well, when I'm making body work, I think primarily in terms of books, I suppose in a sort of literary mode, where one photograph follows onto another, building on it to create a whole. So from the dark earth, we go to this kind of more open view, and perhaps a more traditional landscape. But again, at the centre of it, this kind of path, this patch worn bare by many, many feet, kind of stopping in this spot to take in the view. And there's something in this picture, actually you can't really see so well it on the screen, but there's a kind of a sort of natural vignetting. It's much more present in the book or in the print, but this kind of darkening around the edges. And it's not something that I've added afterwards. It's I think part of what made me want to stop in this position and in this spot and take the picture. I think for me it helps to create a sense of being surrounded by this space, kind of almost swallowed by it. And this, I guess, this sense of kind of being encircled by something is something that runs through quite a lot of the pictures in the work. And these kind of layers of encircling, this sense of being kind of surrounded by this space, and then that's this space itself being part of, sort of subsumed by the sprawling kind of mutating city. Here we've got that natural vignetting again. I don't know if this happens in New York, but in London there's a lot of people who have dogs but don't have enough time to always enjoy walking them, so they pay professional dog walkers, and that's what's going on here. And this woman, she attached these kind of long leads, these strings to the dogs, partly so she could grab hold of them easier, but also because they'd often run off into the undergrowth and get lost, and so the sound that they'd make as the leads kind of pulled through the leaves, and the undergrowth would allow her to track them down more easily. And here another string, another filament, and another kind of enclosure, an intervention, sort of fallen tree. Another fallen tree, perhaps a sense of one thing kind of being absorbed gradually into another. And again, this kind of ice that's been left on the grass, so a sense of that same sense of one thing turning into or melting into another, but on a different scale. I like here the way the lichen and the birdseed on this part of the bridge echo the raindrop, the circles made by the rain, and the air bubbles. Another kind of sense of suspension, repetition of the logs. I have these giant snowballs that have kind of been pushed as far as they can go before they get too heavy, and these kind of snail trails hang out behind them. And here, this again, it's kind of hard to see on the projection, but the man here, is the park ranger cutting back. He's almost swallowed by the darkness and the branches he's cutting back. I like the way that his kind of white hair echoes with the cut ends of the branches. And here another kind of bright spot, this time a security light kind of sitting in the landscape like the sun. Up to now we've, I suppose, not encountered many people, and so here I wanted to allow, I suppose, the park as it is, kind of busy and populated with people, to kind of come into the work. That's almost as a way of sort of pointing up the construction of the solitude of the kind of walk so far. And then maybe here to kind of drift away again. I love the way it's everything sort of intertwined with each other here. And this kind of dismembered tree, it feels almost like it's been punished for smashing through the fence and kind of transgressing those boundaries. Two rough sleepers sheltering. This picture makes me think of a great romantic term, Brockenspector, which is is this thing that happens occasionally in the high mountain where a ghostly figure will appear, which is caused by your shadow cast on the clouds below you. Here maybe a nod to Magritte. I like in this picture the way the kind of last rays of the sun and the lamplight mingle indivisibly. Here, two more lamps becoming part of the forest. And this is the last picture in this work, and then kind of another lamppost sunset, and a sort of echo for me of the first picture in the work. So when I was probably maybe 3 years into making this, I sort of had a good sense of where the work was going, but I kind of knew I probably had another year or so of photographing and editing before the it turned out to be more than a year, but before it would be complete. And at this point, I kind of wanted to kind of be back at the beginning, back kind of making new work in a place that was kind of open and amorphous again. And that's when I started taking pictures on what became the second book, Something Like a Nest. And this work started with these pictures that I was taking in food factories, and I found the idea of these places fascinating and kind of disturbing. But I found that the pictures were too kind of bounded. The emotional tone was kind of too constant. I watched this German film, Our Daily Bread, which is a great kind of miserable dystopian film about industrialized food production, and I suppose I felt like what I was doing was maybe just making a still version of that, and I didn't really want to feel I needed to. I realized what I needed to do was kind of expand the scope of what I was doing, and kind of disrupt the work. And so I started taking these pictures in the fields and the villages that surrounded these factories. And this was the as I said, the first picture in the book, and I've probably spoken enough about that one already. So this is the second one. We go from there to this another winter scene and this kind of bloodstain in the snow. With the heath, I wanted to kind of avoid a seasonal structure in the work, and to make a feeling of a kind of walk, but one that I suppose was perhaps more like our memories. It was kind of fragmented and apparently continuous, but that kind of moved around in time. And that was kind of one of the challenges with that work, getting something that felt coherent, that felt like a journey, but at the same time kind of not sticking to that seasonal structure. And I experimented with the similar structure in this work, but I kept on coming back to, I suppose, a more traditional form, going from one winter to another, and it sort of felt unavoidable. So I suppose that structure and the kind of implication that comes with it of the kind of creative destructive cycle and sort of spring birth, winter death, and harvest in between. I suppose it's such a sort of central theme of the pastoral that this kind of work had to be in dialogue with. But yeah, it felt like I couldn't kind of move away from that. And so, but part of the challenge with making the work was to stick to that structure, but also to subvert it and to not just feel like I was kind of rehearsing the old cliches. So from there, the next picture is this frog spawn in a jar sitting on a windowsill. So maybe from the kind of death of the previous picture to here, the kind of potential for life. And I think again in this picture there's kind of a number of things going on that sort of repeat through the work. One is a sense of containment, and another is the kind of symbolism of the eggs. In the work there aren't actually any nests. There's lots of things which are something like a nest. There's jars and there's boxes and hands and then there's any number of pictures which could perhaps be described as nests in a use of the word that's broader still. So the title kind of seemed fitting, and I wanted something which was kind of elusive rather than prescriptive. I think when working in a kind of documentary style with straight pictures like this, but with intentions that aren't really journalistic but are kind of more lyrical, I think the title is something that can be useful in kind of steering the viewer towards that kind of mode of engagement with the work. And it was inspired, the title, by a quote from a John Banville novel, The Sea, that I print at the end of the book, where it says, "A thing that always struck me was the contrast between nest and egg. I mean, the contingency of the former, no matter how well or even beautifully it's fashioned, and the latter's completedness, its pristine fullness. Before it's a beginning, an egg is an absolute end." I think one of the things I liked about that was, I suppose, that thinking about the countryside and the idea of the countryside as I was making the work, it sort of felt often like the countryside is, we sometimes think of the countryside more as something like an egg, this thing which is a kind of a pure symbol, sealed and cut off from the messiness of kind of the city and modernity. But actually, if you stand in a field or a farm or a village, what you find is that actually what's in front of you is much more like a nest. It's something that's built out of the materials to hand, that's completely contingent upon and part of the surrounding context. And I guess that context is the expediences of 21st century capitalism, as well as the kind of cycle of the seasons, and our kind of hopes, our dreams about what this place might represent as well are obviously part of that context too. In this next picture, we've got kind of this smoke that obscuring the view, and this again is kind of something that comes up repeatedly through the work. This sense of not being able to quite see or kind of connect with what's in front of us. And here another country kitchen, and again perhaps that sense of containment and kind of disconnection. Here a food factory processing carrots. And this, it's Easter, and we've got a model of Calvary made out of English moss and primroses, and contained in a packing crate for vegetables, or for grapes, I think it says, which perhaps even came from Israel. And when I was going out taking pictures, I'd often be looking for things which would kind of mark this point in the year, this particular point in the year. But I guess I could never have dreamt I would have found this. It was sort of just sitting mysteriously in the doorway of a church. There's a kind of a mixed symbol of the local and the global, and the end of winter and rebirth. And here another nest. And this time we've got the chickens and the chicks as well as the eggs. And here a resurrected pigeon. It's a funny kind of rebirth. It's been shot and then stuck on this kind of mechanical spinner to reanimate it. And now that it's flying happily around there, other pigeons think, it's safe to come in and land and meet the same end. and here a piglet being born in an industrial pig unit, which is not a happy place. I suppose, but throughout the work, there's kind of I suppose what I'm trying to do is build these different, this kind of sense of kind of interconnection between the images. So narratively, in the last few pictures, we've been riffing around kind of ideas of kind of rebirth, and from Calvary to the chicken and egg to Resurrected Pigeon to the kind of blossom coming out of these dead leaves to this literal birth. Then there's also the kind of compositional, the visual links, kind of rhymes and assonance. So in this picture we've got the pink kind of blossom shooting up to the right there, and it's kind of arc, and then the pig kind of echoing that down to the left. Then this next picture, which is kind of reworking of Wordsworth's Field of Golden Daffodils. We've got the kind of green of the previous. We've got two things. One, this sense of looking into a sewer space, and then the green of the background kind of repeated here in the vertical lines. And then again, this sense of the kind of translucent plastic stopping us from fully seeing into this space. The kind of migrant workers, Romanians, we can just glimpse picking in the background. And then here the kind of yellow carries and the literal repetition of the daffodils. And this curtain, we kind of wonder what's behind this. Perhaps we wonder what's behind this incredible drapery. And it's another nest coming out of the darkness, and the kind of yellow carries to the chicks here huddled up. And then now we've got it's a different kitchen, but a similar view to the first picture. And these kitchen windows kind of repeat through the work as a sort of leitmotif that marks the passing of the seasons. Here, this is a maypole dance. I'm not sure if it's something that happens here, but it's like a sort of pagan tradition. I like the way that this kind of cheerleading move is kind of made its way in at the back of the frame. Now, writer David Campney said in his recent book, if I can find the quote, he said that dust may become a catalyst of critical thoughts, and in a way of imagining a quality of duration quite at odds with the speed of modernity. I like the way the dust that covers all of this kind of stuff kept just in case on the left here makes it kind of all uniform in tone, sort of in a similar way to the boxes in the far end of the frame. With this picture and kind of ones that precede it, that follow it, I wanted maybe to create sort of a sequence which had a kind of Forest of Arden feel, a sense of maybe leaving behind the kind of conventional. There's a kind of feeling that I felt occasionally when I was out photographing, and sort of heading somewhere a little stranger. I don't know if you saw Jez Butterworth's play Jerusalem. I think it was on Broadway a few years back. It kind of explored some similar territory. And this guy, for me, makes me think of Mark Rylance's character Rooster in that play. Someone living kind of on the wilder fringes of society. And this blue serpent is the tube that's used to transfer fish from a tanker into the pond beyond, to be caught by the red-headed boys. I love her hands here, and also the way that the plastic table underneath them has kind of taken on the pattern that we might associate with a kind of ancient rustic kind of wooden table. I think that plastic and the sort of weathering of plastic is something I was often drawn to. Here's summer. A kind of Rousseau-esque tomato and industrial greenhouse. It's a grain store. And this picture for me, I suppose, feels like a kind of still point, sort of apex of summer before everything starts dropping back towards winter. I think in this picture there's kind of got a lot of the tensions that are in the work for me. I suppose this is a harvest festival celebration, and the fact that these kind of plastic wrapped commodity, sort of supermarket commodities are the harvest, are kind of what's being celebrated, is perhaps kind of dispiriting, especially when set against the kind of idea of the countryside as a place of kind of connection to the land and the soil. And they're almost kind of symbols of kind of the pervasiveness of the kind of corporate and the generic over the local. But it also is something that kind of pulls in the opposite direction for me as well. It's a community coming together to mark the seasons. This food will be donated to some sort of charity. I think perhaps even as much as that, or maybe more than that, it's also just the way that the light falls, and the way that these different materials from different centuries kind of sit sort of comfortably together, that I find kind of uplifting. It's a reworking of a romantic ruin. And here, maybe that piglet grown up again in this kind of industrial pig unit, which is, not a place any animal should really have to live, especially pigs. They're just the smartest dogs and really know how to suffer. And this is another, it's not a pagan festival this time, but another festival, a kind of macabre one. It's Guy Fawkes night, when an effigy of Guy Fawkes is burnt to celebrate his failure to blow up the Houses of Parliament. I like particularly in this picture the way that the bonfires formed out of these pallets, the kind of basic unit of globalized logistics and supply. Autumn. Or fall, I guess. This is a pile of unwanted bread, and it's not a kind of one-off thing. It's something, I think it's to do with the way the supply chain works. There's very often a kind of over capacity, and so there's this company which is just in this taken a couple of spaces in a barn on this farm where they took the unwanted bread and then stripped the plastic out of it and turned it into dog food. Here another, I guess, familiar autumnal site of bonfire on an allotment, but this time rather than kind of the prunings and fallen leaves, it's carpet and chipboard and plastic. I don't know if you can see it just in the paper on the left-hand side. The headline says reality. Here a Christmas tree plantation. And a Christmas turkey feels more mineral than animal to me. And I like this, his kind of Christ-like pose. He's actually he's putting out a camouflage net, which he's going to hide under and shoot rooks as they come into land. So here we end with It's actually the death that we saw the trace of at the beginning of the book, and the snow. And this picture for me is almost like a kind of endpoint, a kind of ending, and then something like a nest again, with this time made out of packing box from Spain and newspaper headlines and adverts. I like the line there, think beautiful. And then we end, I guess as T.S. Eliot put it in the last line of Burnt Norton, my end is in my beginning. And again, it's another, that's sort of a great work of modern pastoral. And yeah, we've got another kitchen, and it's again a different kitchen, but the view links us back to where we began. I think something that kind of really excited me about making work in this landscape was the way that, since kind of classical times, it's been used to represent so much, or often these kind of various forms of yearning. So every view is kind of loaded with expectation, significance, symbolism. I suppose I hope what I've done here, what I've been trying to do, is make something where some of these different layers can kind of sit together and kind of speak to each other in various ways. Yeah, not in kind of a set of didactic kind of juxtapositions, but hopefully in something that's kind of a more intertwined, contradictory whole. Thank you very much.
They're both familiar and strange, and I think, like tons of people who've spent a lot of time in London, the Heath was also someplace I went to a lot. I spent some time living on the edge of it, so I also saw it change. It is an unbelievable space. It's amazing that something like that is in the heart of the city, and it's so different from Central Park. But yet what I love about the photographs is they bring out so very clearly exactly what you said, that it's this managed wildness. And that brought me to thinking about the, because these also strike me as such English pictures, and something about the English tradition of landscape. So what I wanted to do, and you'll forgive me, is I'm just going to read about 4 lines from Ruskin's Lecture on Landscape from 1871. And this is what he says. He's talking about painting, but this makes me think of your photographs as well. Landscape painting is the thoughtful and passionate representation of the physical conditions appointed for human existence. It imitates the aspects and records the phenomena of the visible things which are dangerous or beneficial to man, and displays the human methods of dealing with these and of enjoying them or suffering from them, which are either exemplary or deserving of sympathetic contemplation. It is so natural to suppose that the main interest of landscape is in water and rocks and sky, and that figures are to be put like the salt and the mustard in a dish only to give it flavor. Put that out of your head at once. The interest of a landscape consists wholly in its relation either to figures present, or to figures past, or to human powers conceived. And then he says, It is most important that you should convince yourself of and fully enter into this truth, because all the difficulty in choosing subject arises from mistakes about it. I dare say some of you who are fond of sketching have gone out in the most beautiful country, and yet with the feeling there was no good subject to be found in it. That always arises from your not having sympathy enough with its vital character, and looking for physical picturesqueness instead. On the contrary, there are crude efforts at landscape painting, made continually upon the most splendid physical phenomenon in America and other countries without history. It is not the slightest use. Niagara or the North Pole and the Aurora Borealis won't make a landscape, but a ditch at Iffley will, if you have humanity in you, enough in you to interpret the feelings of hedgers and ditchers and frogs. And I think it was the frog spawn that brought me back to this. I guess what I wanted to say is I find these so interesting because they're all about relationships, about the relationship of the human and the natural world. And that seems to be, and I guess the segue into the second book is that you've made that relationship absolutely the heart of the story, that it becomes really about that, so that labor and capital and the work of working on landscape enters in as the subject. And in a way, I find the second book harder for me to look at, because you're so swept away with the aesthetic beauty of the first book. The second book, the pictures are beautiful, but they're also troubling in a much more serious way because of what they say about the life we live and labor and capital in the countryside. That said, I guess I wanted to ask you to, maybe you could speak a little bit more about what those photographs of kitchen windows do for you, because I thought those were, they're beautiful to begin with, but they also, they're also kind of reverse portraits. They're portraits of the person who lives in the kitchen, right? And that also meant for me, I was looking at those and I was thinking, it reminded me so much of when I lived in Cambridge. I had a kitchen window and a bird feeder outside the kitchen window, and a constant problem with birds nesting in my kitchen vent. And I was always trying to save these birds in the nest in the kitchen vent. And it reminded me of how much I miss in New York not having a kitchen window. And there's something about those portraits which are kind of, not romantic, but sort of redeeming in a way, because they bring you back to a person who labors, but the labor is also within their own nest in a way, looking out at the natural world, which is managed and so on, but is also beautiful. And so I came to those pictures also with relief after the pictures of factory farms. They kind of bring you back to the human. So I guess that's all I really wanted to say, but thank you. It was really a privilege to look at your pictures.
Thank you.
Well, we can open this up for further observations, comments.
Well, I have a question about windows, and it's the 21st century still, whatever it is, but thinking back, I guess, a couple hundred years, and about the composition. So, in the ones I'm thinking about, right, or something, every single thing that's in the composition is still like symbolic in some way, right? So, I guess what I'm wondering is how composed
how much I
how
intervened
much
in the
you
scene.
put things there, and what in fact is heavily symbolic. Is there a contingency factor here more than there is?
I mean, I think the way that I work is always motivated by discovery. I guess I'm not interested in thinking something up and then going out and finding an instance of it or kind of creating that picture. But I think what I find, I mean, I guess as I talked about, for me it's about that process of just looking at the stuff of the world and trying to kind of make some sense of that. That said, I'm not kind of wedded to a kind of some sort of authentic idea of authenticity, which requires me never to move an object around to make a better composition. And there's a great American photographer, Robert Adams, who in something I read by him was saying about Ozu, the Japanese director of Tokyo Story, and how there's this kind of story about the way that he was filming a scene and they were setting up for another shot, a different angle, and he started moving everything around on the table, and the kind of assistant director was like, what are you doing? What about continuity? And he was like, nobody ever notices that. This makes a better composition. And I suppose that for me, I guess I'm interested in finding that scene, and then if there's something that's just not working composition in it, I might take it out, or I might move another thing in if I find it interesting. But I try to do that as kind of little as is necessary. But I don't have that. And
so what makes it necessary?
I mean, it's feeling, and I think there's always something when kind of talking about pictures like this. There's a number of things which are kind of tricky, and one of them's you're kind of translating from a visual to a verbal medium. But another thing is the way that it can sound as if when I was looking at standing in front of that window, looking at that scene on the kind of ground glass of the camera, but all of these kind of thoughts that I have about it now were what I had at the time, and that was all kind of part of the plan. And I suppose that isn't how I work. I guess I work from a sense of from something which at the beginning is much more instinctive, and then after the fact there's a kind of conceptualization out of looking at the picture, usually, rather than looking at the scene. When I'm actually taking the pictures, it's much more about looking and something more instinctive, and it just feels more right there than it does there.
The back.
Yes, thank you. I was actually struck by the fact that you very much stressed something that is probably peculiar to the book structure, but also in your talk, that is the compositional aspect not only of the images themselves, but their organization, their succession, either in the book or during the time frame of this talk. And what caught my attention is that you seem to be very wary of being enframed in some kind of enframed, whatever that may be, being put into a box, whether that is of some kind of romantic aspiration, or whether that may be some aesthetic codification, things that we might be reminded of. I think we all had different associations, pictures, paintings, photographs we have already seen, but you seem to make a very important point in undoing this kind of automatism of, I know where to put this. I want to ask you about this kind of compositional aspect that seems to be important in your work too, that is to permanently undo this kind of box we would like to put your pictures into, whether it is pure nature or pure human, purely technical, purely real instance.
I mean, I think most of the art across different forms that I respond most strongly to, that I kind of love most, is sort of walking that line between, or is often kind of contradicting itself, or walking a kind of line between sort of form and formlessness. And I think that and again, just that experience of, or the practice of looking at the world, looking at the stuff in front of you in as kind of clear a way as you can, I think always, for me anyway, always throws up contradiction and paradox. And I suppose maybe one of the roles of art is to try and create something which, and it always sort of fails, like, but that's necessary, that's its job, is to try and kind of create some way of kind of, again, as the photographer Paul Graham, who I think describes it as taking photographs of a meaningless world and forming those photographs into something meaningful. And so I suppose that's the sort of I think that you pick up on the sequencing, and that for me is something that I guess photography, I think, does well. So we're saying that thing of building associations between pictures, and creating a kind of coherence between these pictures, the one that doesn't resolve easily into certain sentences, but that you can return to and find, hopefully that I can return to and find new things, and the viewer can kind of return to, and it will, dependent on the mood you come to work in, though it will change, it will accommodate that.
Yes.
I think it's obvious for when you discover an image in nature, do you compose the image in your mind and then snap a single picture, and you take several versions of it?
I guess with both books I was shooting on film, and on quite large format film, so that something like a nest that was on like that was shot with a camera that's kind of made out of wood, and where you get one, like a sort of, you put a cloth over your head like a kind of Victorian photographer, and you get one, you put a plate in, and that's your one shot. So and they're each piece of film is extremely expensive, and so that kind of concentrates your mind. So I would spend a lot of time looking through, and you get the kind of ground glass on the back of the camera, which is sort of so big, and you could get I would spend a lot of time just sort of looking at that and thinking, is that a picture or is that not a picture? And then kind of deciding taking the picture if I thought it was. With something like a nest, it was shot with a camera where you had 10 shots on a roll. So I could be a little bit looser, but still really, not taking, it's not kind of, I guess it's an approach where you do a lot of the kind of selecting. I would do a lot of selecting with my eyes, and looking through the camera, and then decide what the picture was I was going to take.
I'm interested when you're talking a little bit about memory and landscape, and how you came, first of all, to landscape as your this genre, but are these landscapes you grew up with, or are these deliberately less familiar landscapes? I mean, how does that enter into how you...
I mean, I suppose there is a sort of depth with I guess with both bodies of work. There is I grew up I was born in London and then grew up in the kind of countryside surrounding London, but I suppose in a place where everybody would commute into work, or most people would commute to work in London, and so surrounded by fields and farms, but there's not, maybe perhaps that sense of disconnection from that landscape comes yeah, a sort of familiarity and a sense of it as being a, you know, it's somewhere that I used to play in, and that was something that I kind of really value. But an actual kind of connection, I guess, yeah, living an urban kind of existence against a rural backdrop, and yeah, I suppose that obviously has some connections perhaps with the last book particularly.
Most of the landscapes that photographs only sort of industrial direction in the background, the other could easily lend themselves to an epic tree.
To an epic tree?
An epic tree.
Yeah.
But you don't go there at all. Why is that?
I suppose because those are the familiar images that I have in my head, and I suppose what I'm interested in doing is, yeah, I don't feel I don't need to kind of recraft those pictures. I suppose yeah, I guess there's a lot of depictions of landscape perhaps fall into kind of maybe two broad categories. I guess there's ones which are kind of recrafting those kind of epic views that we're used to, or the kind of pastoral tropes, and then there's another, especially sort of in contemporary photography, there's another approach which is kind of taking those kind of cliches and inverting them, sort of iconoclastic kind of approach, and that can be interesting and powerful, but again, I suppose it feels like that's almost becoming a kind of cliche in itself. And I suppose a lot of what I'm trying to do, a lot of what I'm doing, what you're trying to do as a photographer, I suppose, is navigate around cliches, is find ways to see things fresh that make you actually have to look, rather than you know, just these icons that you kind of know what they are as soon as you see them. And I suppose I'm trying to make something which is in the kind of tension between those two approaches. So I think there are pictures in the book where the sort of strings do swell a little, and but that's sort of pulled back, and I think there are pictures which I find pretty bleak, but I think hopefully they're kind of pulled in a different direction by other pictures in the work, or by kind of internally within that picture. I suppose that's what I'm interested in.
I really was struck by how you imagine these not simply as photos, but also as a piece for the book. Have a sort of quasi-narrative to them.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering about process. I mean, I don't know much about photography. To what extent did you sort of just realize that the nest, for instance, was going to be an important mechanic for this type of project?
Yeah.
And is that something that you discovered early on, or is it something that as you go later you look at?
Yeah.
And it's never break your heart that there's a great photo that that's not you know.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't stick to a sort of strict rule that it had to be nest-like, but definitely, I suppose the way I work is at the beginning certainly not conceptually driven. It's about finding kind of pictures that I think are compelling. And then it's about looking at those pictures and starting to see kind of what they're telling me, how they might relate to each other, and what the work might become. And then out of doing that reflection, that editing, I'll start to kind of create sentences about what I think the work might be, and kind of start creating sentences that kind of interrogate what I'm doing. And then those sentences, that kind of conceptualization feeds back into the next time I go out to take pictures, and that kind of shit, and I'm like, like nests, maybe I'll like kind of put things that mark, kind of put specific points in time, like trying to find pictures that are of the kind of the pastoral kind of tropes, but that don't feel like they're kind of just repeating the sort of the pictures we're used to. I might start looking for very specific things, like I need dead things, or I need Christmas trees, or whatever. And I might have a list of stuff that I don't end up ever finding. But yeah, it's this kind of iterative approach of taking pictures, kind of reflecting on them, seeing how they're working together, going out again, and then doing that reflection again, and gradually sort of through that process of looking, photographing, and then looking at the photographs and editing and kind of making some sort of sense of what I'm doing. Hopefully the project kind of comes together. And yeah, there are pictures that in the Heath I took a lot of portraits, that some of which I really liked, but they just didn't kind of fit with the kind of flow of the sort of the mood that I was looking to create in the work. They were kind of too direct, and they sort of broke that, and so they had to go.
I think you pretty much just answered my question, but I'll state it anyway, which was kind of following the sequence of the books, to ask you what you're working on now and what you might want to be working on, or what's kind of up next.
Partly I'm not entirely sure what it will be, because I'm at the beginning of some things, and like at the beginning of something I'm not really sure if it's ever going to actually turn into anything, or but I suppose the whole point of what I'm doing is trying to do something that I don't know what it is before I start, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. I am, like, part of the reason that part of what worked well about this residency was that I'm making trying to make, exploring a kind of project at the moment which is transatlantic. So I'm photographing in Cornwall and in Long Island at these particular places on the coast which are linked by one of the cables, one of the main cables that carries the internet between Europe and America. And so at the moment it's just, there was something about the Heath and then the countryside and then the sea, sort of on a really kind of trite level. Felt like maybe and I love, the sea is, I guess these books are sort of partly motivated by, these are places that I'm kind of compelled by, and the sea is another place that I feel strongly drawn to. But there's also something, I suppose, something I think there's something in the technological sublime, that these cables represent, this kind of tiny cable that can carry millions and millions of stories across vast, that can basically allows us to sort of transcend space and time, allows me to ping a picture back to my girlfriend in London and have this strange kind of this strange sort of partial existence which transcends those kind of normal boundaries, and this, I guess the sort of sublimity of that, and the ocean, the kind of oceanic sublime, the sense that the sea, the coast is somewhere we've often gone for a sense of things kind of that we can't understand, forces beyond us, bigger than we can understand, and I don't know, it feels like there might be something there worth exploring. So that's what I'll be doing next week.
Let's have one last question.
Could I have two?
Yes, very last question.
Fine. So one question was about the work of color in something like a nest. The first image that you showed us from it had such an intense contrast between living things and kitchen-y things, with the space outside as almost entirely artificial. And then there seemed to be quite an argument being made about color, whether artificial materials, looking at a drab or highly plastic, or the kind of dark lushness of the various greens from. So I wanted to ask you about that. The second one was, is there an ongoing clear conversation with other photographers in this, or is this something that I'm imposing while I'm looking at your photographs?
So it's both related to the kind of color argument.
No, the second one is completely more general. Are there moments particularly in something like this, where we're offering some sort of response or some sort of engagement with other photographers?
Okay.
Or am I just reading this into you?
No, I mean, I think maybe start with that one. I guess photography. Well, photography. It's a language, or I guess pictures are another form of language, obviously, and that's a language that's built out of the work that kind of precedes what you're doing out of context. So yeah, certainly there's a lot of the way I see the world is formed through looking at pictures, and that will kind of that will find its way into my work. And I suppose again whatever form you're kind of using, there's always that kind of struggle with and dialogue with influence and the kind of things you love and the things that you are inspired by, but kind of obviously that sense that you don't want to just be repeating somebody else's voice. But yeah, there's certainly for me a kind of dialogue that's going on between our with work that's kind of gone before this. And the colour, yeah, I think I kind of agree with what you're saying. There's something that I was attracted to throughout the work was the way that kind of these artificial materials looked, the kind of colours of them. Either so in that first picture, it's that kind of, and in a lot of the kind of kitchen window pictures, you get the backlighting of the window, which makes these translucent plastic materials even more kind of vivid and intense. And so as I was saying, it's that again, I find I guess this is a thing that that sort of sense of being torn between kind of being attracted and to something and also being disgusted by it is something that I find kind of strong, and yeah, I think that's sort of happening in that picture. I find those things kind of beautiful and kind of gross as well, and I guess I like that. And then the way that kind of the different plastic materials sit in that landscape. Again, this landscape that we expect to see the kind of natural materials, but is actually, of course, totally totally kind of full of plastic and metals and like other, which is kind of no surprise. It's kind of what we know, but perhaps so often the imagery that kind of represents these places edits that stuff out, edits out the kind of telephone wires and I guess I find it much more interesting to kind of let that stuff in and kind of see what's kind of created in that.
Well, if there are any more questions, I suggest you pose them downstairs over a glass of something. You're all invited, and I find this really wonderful, actually. Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Andy.